She came to condemn humanity with a cracked bowl in her hands. Duchess Erilyn Vera stood beside the abandoned roadside shrine as cold rain slid down the hood of her ruined cloak and turned the red dust of New Eden into dark mud around her feet. The shrine had once held a brass bell for travelers, a place where settlers left spare water and handwritten prayers before crossing the wheat plains. Now the bell was gone, the prayer board was empty, and the little roof leaked in 3 places. Erilyn had chosen it carefully. A forgotten place revealed more about a species than its monuments ever did. Beneath the cloak, her silver-blue skin held a faint metallic sheen that she had dulled with ash and weather paste. Her luminous eyes were hidden behind cheap biofilter lenses that made the world look dim and unkind. The cracked bowl in her hands was real, bought from a trader who had not looked at her face long enough to ask questions. She was Duchess of House Vera, envoy of the Outer Accord, and by sunrise she would decide whether the human colony called Iowa Habitat deserved permanent settlement rights or formal removal from protected land. The draft order already waited in her memory gem. She had written most of it before stepping off her ship. Humans, her advisors had said, were charming in public and brutal in scarcity. They polished their welcome gates and hid the hungry in back alleys. They built flags faster than they built justice. Erilyn had come to see if that was true. By late afternoon, the colony had answered too well. The town had been scrubbed for inspection, every window washed, every banner straightened, every muddy cart moved out of sight. Magistrate Cole Barrick stood near the courthouse in a clean brown coat, barking orders at workers to clear the market square before the official alien procession arrived the next morning. No vagrants, no off-world drifters, no unpaid claimants near the center road, he said, his voice carrying through the rain. We are showing order. Erilyn walked through the square, bent beneath her disguise. Bull held out, listening to humans step around her. A woman looked away. A merchant closed his stall window. 2 boys stopped laughing when their father pulled them aside. No one was cruel enough to be memorable. That was worse. Indifference had no sharp edge, but it cut cleanly. Near the grain exchange, Barrick himself saw her and frowned, as if poverty were mud on his polished boot. You cannot sit here, he said. The translator pin at her throat rendered his words into Varen with perfect coldness. Inspection zone. Move along. Erilyn lowered her head and let the bowl slip from her fingers. It hit the road, cracked wider, and rolled into a puddle. She waited. That was the test. Not the order. Not the insult. The bowl. 5 people saw it fall. 4 stepped over it. 1 cartwheel splashed mud across its rim. Erilyn felt the memory gem near her wrist warm as it recorded everything. Her verdict hardened inside her, quiet and heavy. Then a hand reached down. It was a human hand, broad, rough, and darkened with soil under the nails. The man lifted the bowl from the puddle, wiped the mud away with the sleeve of his old canvas jacket, and held it out to her as if it were not trash. He was white, about 38, with rain in his short brown hair and the tired posture of someone who had worked since before dawn. His boots were caked in field mud. A coil of fence wire hung over one shoulder. He did not look official enough to lie for the colony. Ma'am, he said, voice low beneath the rain. When was the last time someone let you sit down? Erilyn stared at him through the dim lenses. It was the first question all day that did not ask what she was, where she belonged, or why she was inconvenient. She tightened her fingers around the cracked bowl. Why? She asked. The man glanced toward Barrick, who had already turned away, then back to her. Because standing hungry in the rain makes every answer worse. He shifted the fence wire higher on his shoulder. My farm is 3 miles out. I have stew on the stove, coffee if you can stand human coffee, and a chair that complains but holds. Erilyn had judged governors, admirals, trade councils, and kings. She had heard species promise mercy in 12 ceremonial languages. None of them had sounded like this farmer offering soup with no audience and no idea that his words had just disturbed the machinery of an empire. The farmer's name was Caleb Turner, though Erilyn did not ask until they were halfway down the road and the town lights had blurred behind them in the rain. He told her anyway, as if names were tools best kept where people could reach them. Caleb, he said, shifting the coil of fence wire from one shoulder to the other. Caleb Turner. Farm is just past the west irrigation line. Erilyn walked beside him with the cracked bowl tucked under her cloak, her biofilter lenses dimming the world into gray shapes and muddy halos. The road out of town ran through red wheat fields bent low from frost sickness, the crop heads dark and brittle where the toxic morning fog had touched them. She had read the agricultural reports. 42% loss across Iowa habitat. Water credits reduced. Debt extensions pending. Food stores marked sufficient in the official file. Sufficient, she now understood, depended on who wrote the number and who skipped dinner to make it true. Caleb did not speak much. That unsettled her. Humans in official rooms filled silence with promises. This one let Rain do the talking. His farm appeared as a low shape beyond the fields. One house, one barn, two greenhouses patched with clear plastic, and a windmill turning slowly even though one blade had been repaired with a different color panel. Nothing matched. Everything worked. A porch light burned over the door, not bright enough to impress visitors, just bright enough to guide somebody home. Caleb stomped mud from his boots before entering and held the door open for her without ceremony. Warmth touched Erilyn first. Then the smell, bean stew, black coffee, old wood, rain drying on coats, and the faint mineral scent of soil carried in from a long day's labor. The kitchen was small. A cast-iron pot rested on the stove. A chipped mug sat beside a stack of unpaid bills weighted by a wrench. On the far wall, a faded photograph showed Caleb beside a woman with laughing eyes, both standing in a half-built doorway years before grief had learned his address. Erilyn looked away before the disguise could become disrespect. "Sit anywhere," Caleb said, then glanced at the nearest chair. "Except that one. It lies about being stable." She sat on the bench near the stove. He poured stew into a bowl, paused when he saw her cracked one still in her hands, then set the good bowl beside it instead of replacing it. That detail entered the memory gem without her permission. He added cornbread on a plate, a cup of warm water, and after a moment, a folded pair of clean wool socks from a drawer by the stove. "Feet get cold first," he said. "Pride complains second." Erilyn studied him through the gray lenses. "What if I am lying?" Caleb looked at the rain moving down the window. "Then lie warm." The sentence had no shine on it. No attempt to be noble. He was already turning back to the stove, already cutting his own portion smaller than hers with the quiet math of someone who had done it before. Erilyn lifted the spoon. The stew was simple. Beans, root vegetables, a little pepper, too little salt, and more care than the colony's banquet menu had contained in 12 courses. Hunger, real or performed, did not matter once warmth reached the body. Her hand stopped shaking around the bowl. Caleb pretended not to notice. "That may have been the kindest part." "Why do you keep food ready?" she asked. He leaned against the counter, holding his mug of coffee with both hands. "Road brings people. You feed all of them?" "Not all. Some do not stop." "That is not an answer." "Best one I have." Rain ticked against the roof. Somewhere in the barn, an animal made a soft, restless sound. Caleb set his mug down at once. "Excuse me." He took a lantern and moved toward the back door. Erilyn followed after a breath, memory gem warming at her wrist. The barn smelled of hay, wet fur, and metal. In a clean stall under a heat lamp, a small calf lay trembling beneath a blanket. Caleb knelt beside it and warmed a bottle between his palms before feeding it. "Frost got her mother's feed crop," he said quietly. "She gets stubborn about living anyway." Erilyn watched the farmer give the animal milk before returning to his own untouched bowl. No official saw it. No inspector recorded it, but her. No reward waited. The rain softened outside, and for the first time that day, her verdict did not feel finished. Caleb returned to the kitchen after the calf finished the bottle, but he did not return to his stew right away. He rinsed the bottle, hung the lantern by the back door, and took a folded cloth from the counter before stepping back into the rain. Erilyn watched through the window as he crossed the yard to the nearest greenhouse, shoulders bent against the weather, boots sinking into red mud. He moved like a man too tired to waste motion and too stubborn to stop before everything that depended on him had been checked. She should have stayed by the stove. Her disguise was wet. Her body was cold beneath the ash paste. Her memory gem had already gathered enough evidence for a revised report. Instead, she followed. The greenhouse door creaked when Caleb opened it. Warm, damp air rolled out, carrying the smell of soil, copper pipes, and green things fighting for another week. Inside, rows of red wheat seedlings stood under grow lights, half of them yellowed at the tips from frost sickness. Caleb knelt beside a cracked irrigation valve and wrapped it with seal tape. "You do not have to come out here," he said without turning. "I wanted to see what kind of man leaves his food twice. A hungry one with responsibilities." Erilyn looked down the rows. "Your official report said your farm remained productive." Caleb gave a short breath that was almost a laugh. "Official reports have never met my east field. How much did you lose this season?" He tightened the valve. "Enough to make bankers polite. And still you give food away. I gave you a bowl of stew, not a land grant. You gave the calf milk before yourself. She weighs 80 pounds and has bad timing. I weigh 200 and can complain in full sentences." Erilyn did not smile, though something in her almost remembered how. The grow lights flickered overhead. Caleb tapped one with 2 fingers until it steadied. His hands were rough, cracked at the knuckles, marked by small cuts that looked older than tonight. "Why?" she asked. "Why what? Why feed strangers before yourself?" This time he stopped. Rain ticked against the greenhouse roof in soft thousands. The seedlings moved slightly in the vent draft, each thin blade trembling under artificial dawn. Caleb kept his back to her for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had lost its dry humor. "My wife got caught in a whiteout 6 years ago between here and Miller's Crossing. Our rover died 2 miles from the nearest house. She made it to the porch. Nobody opened." Erilyn's grip tightened around the cracked bowl. "Why?" "Scared. Tired. Maybe they thought she was trouble. Maybe they thought someone else would help." He stood, wiped his hands on his jacket, and looked at the dark glass of the greenhouse wall where his reflection appeared thin and warped. By the time searchlights found her, morning had already done what morning does. It made everything visible after it was too late. The words settled into the humid air. Erilyn had heard testimony from shattered moons, famine courts, and border tribunals. She had trained herself to separate grief from policy, pain from proof. But Caleb did not use his loss as proof of human virtue. He did not polish it. He only carried it like an old tool, heavy and necessary. "So now you open your door," she said. "Now I open my door, even if the person at it is lying. Especially then." He picked up a crate of nutrient plugs and carried it toward the far row. People who tell the truth about needing help usually had to spend a long time learning no one wanted to hear it. Erilyn followed him between the seedlings. The memory gem warmed again, recording every word. For the first time, she wanted to turn it off. Not because the evidence was useless, but because it felt too intimate to belong to a council chamber. Caleb set the crate down, then pulled a small cloth sack from a shelf and tucked it under his arm. "Mrs. Adley's roof is leaking over her pantry," he said. "I promised to patch it before morning." Erilyn looked at the rain. "You are going back out. Roof leaks do not respect schedules. You have a guest. You have stew." He paused at the door and glanced at her cracked bowl. "And dry socks if pride has finished negotiating." The sentence should have sounded foolish. It did not. It sounded like a door opening somewhere inside a verdict Erilyn had believed was locked. Caleb did not ask Erilyn to come with him, and for a minute she told herself she would not. The kitchen was warm. The stew waited on the table. The dry socks lay folded beside the stove like a challenge wrapped in wool. Outside, rain crawled down the windows and turned the farmyard into a field of black glass. A duchess did not follow farmers through mud to patch the roof of a woman she had never met. A judge did not gather evidence by carrying a cloth sack of sealant under one arm while her borrowed boots sank to the ankle. Yet 5 minutes later, Erilyn was walking beside Caleb beneath a sky the color of cold iron, the cracked bowl tucked safely inside her cloak. He handed her a lantern without comment. That was becoming his most unsettling habit, offering usefulness instead of questions. Mrs. Adley lived half a mile down the service road in a small prefab house pressed between 2 windbreak trees. One room glowed through the curtains. The rest sat dark to save power. Caleb knocked once, then opened the porch cabinet and took out a folded ladder as if he had done this before. "She is sleeping," he said. "Hip pain. No need to wake her if the roof can be quieter than I am." Erilyn looked up at the slanted roof, where water slipped beneath a lifted panel and dripped into the wall seam. "You repair houses while people sleep?" "Only if they trust me. And if they cannot pay." Caleb climbed the ladder with the sealant sack. "Then I do not wake them for that either." The answer landed softly and stayed. Erilyn held the lantern while he worked. Rain beat against his shoulders. The wind pulled at the loose edge of the roof panel, making it chatter like nervous teeth. Caleb pressed the panel flat, sealed the seam, anchored 2 fasteners, and tested the run of water with one gloved hand. His movements were exact, practiced, unceremonial. No audience. No praise. Not even Mrs. Adley's thanks. Just a leak made smaller in the dark. Erilyn lifted the lantern higher. You said no one opened the door for your wife. Caleb paused on the ladder. For a moment, the rain filled the place where his breath should have been. I did. Yet you still repair their roofs. Mrs. Adley did open, but others did not. He tightened the final fastener. If I let the worst door teach me every door, then the worst door wins twice. Erilyn looked away. Her memory gem pulsed at her wrist, capturing the sentence, polishing it into evidence. She wondered if her counsel would understand it. She wondered if she did. When they returned to the farmhouse, a ground truck waited beside the porch. Its headlights cut pale bars through the rain. Magistrate Cole Barrick stood under the awning, clean coat spotless despite the mud, one hand holding an official tablet, the other pinching the bridge of his nose as if Caleb had become a headache with acreage. Turner, Barrick said, I was informed you removed an unidentified alien vagrant from the inspection zone. Caleb leaned the ladder against the porch rail. Evening, Magistrate. This is not neighbor business. The alien delegation arrives tomorrow. We cannot have unauthorized drifters compromising settlement presentation. Erilyn stood half behind Caleb, hood low, bowl hidden. The old test would have ended here. Human authority discovering human mercy and punishing it for being inconvenient. Caleb took off his wet gloves slowly. She was hungry. Barrick's eyes narrowed. Then direct her to temporary holding. She needed a chair, food, and dry socks. Holding was not on the list. You are risking water credits and grain permit review over a stranger. Caleb opened the farmhouse door and let warmth spill onto the porch between them. A town that throws hungry people into the rain does not need cleaner streets. It needs better hearts. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. Behind him, the stove clicked. The stew waited. The chair that complained still held. Erilyn stood in the rain with a cracked bowl against her chest and felt her verdict begin to break. Barrick did not leave right away. Men like him rarely did when a room refused to arrange itself around their authority. He stood on Caleb's porch with rain threading down the clean edges of his coat, official tablet glowing in one hand, jaw tight enough to make every word sound measured. Caleb stayed in the doorway, not blocking it like a fighter, but like a man who understood that warmth behind him mattered more than approval in front of him. Erilyn stood just inside the kitchen shadows with her hood low, the cracked bowl pressed against her ribs, listening to a human official explain why kindness had become a scheduling problem. Water credits are reviewed at the magistrate office, Barrick said. So are grain permits, emergency seed loans, and transport access to the eastern market. I would hate for your farm to be marked non-cooperative before winter audit. Caleb looked past him toward the fields, where red wheat bent under rain and debt. The threat was not dramatic. That made it worse. No raised voice. No cruelty anyone could photograph. Just pressure placed on the exact boards that held a poor man's life together. You do what your office tells you to do, Caleb said. I am doing what my kitchen tells me to do. Barrick's eyes flicked toward Erilyn. And what does your kitchen say about unidentified alien visitors? Caleb stepped aside just enough that the stove light reached the porch. That they get soup before forms. For a second, the only sound was rain ticking on the porch roof. Then Barrick closed his tablet with a sharp motion. Tomorrow, when the Duchess arrives, do not embarrass this colony. Caleb's expression did not change. I will try not to feed her in the rain. Barrick stared at him, unable to decide whether the sentence was stupidity or disrespect. Then he turned and walked back to his truck, boots somehow avoiding most of the mud. His headlights swept across the kitchen window, across Erilyn's hidden face, across the chipped bowl on the table, and vanished down the road toward a town polished clean enough to lie. Caleb shut the door softly. He did not celebrate. He did not curse. He only crossed to the stove, stirred the stew, and added water to stretch it farther. Erilyn watched the motion. He can harm you. He can make paperwork harm me. That is still harm. Yes. Caleb tasted the stew, frowned, added pepper. But hunger does not wait for legal clarity. She sat at the table because standing suddenly felt dishonest. Why would you risk your farm for someone you do not know? He set a bowl in front of her, then another in front of himself, smaller again. I know enough. You know nothing. Caleb leaned back in his chair. The light over the table hummed faintly, making the unpaid bills on the counter look older than paper. I know you were outside. I know you were wet. I know the town saw you and kept moving. That is enough to start. Erilyn looked down at the stew. Steam touched the underside of her hood and warmed the biofilter lenses until the edges blurred. Among my people, judgment is made after full evidence. Good. He tore a piece of cornbread and pushed the plate closer to her. Eat more evidence. Against her will, against training, against the cold structure of noble discipline, Erilyn almost smiled. It hurt in a strange place. Later, when the clock above the sink passed midnight, Caleb packed a small sack of flour, beans, and dried apples. Erilyn followed him to the pantry door. Another animal? Family North Road. 3 kids. Their father's harvester broke. You have enough to spare? He looked at the half-empty shelves, then at the sack. No, then why? Caleb tied the cord tight. Because they have less. The words entered her memory gem, quiet as falling grain. Outside, the rain had softened. Caleb stepped onto the porch and placed the sack in a weather box by the rail where someone could collect it without being seen. Erilyn understood then that the farm was not one act of kindness. It was an invisible network of small mercies, hidden from reports because reports measured yield, not decency. When Caleb came back inside, she had removed one wool sock from the folded pair and held it in her hand like an artifact from a civilization she had misjudged. You said pride complains second, she said. Caleb hung his wet hat by the stove. Usually loud. Erilyn sat, slowly, and put on the socks. They were too large. They were warm. Her memory gem recorded nothing for several seconds, because for the first time since the test began, the Duchess of House Vera forgot to judge. Erilyn slept in the chair by the stove for less than an hour and woke before dawn to the sound of Caleb moving through the kitchen. He was not quiet in the way trained servants were quiet. He was farm quiet. Boots placed carefully. Cabinet doors caught before they clicked. Coffee poured slow enough not to splash. The house held the last blue dark hour before morning, when the world seemed to be deciding whether it had the strength to begin again. Rain had stopped. Water dripped from the eaves in soft counts. Erilyn sat up with the wool socks still on her feet and her cracked bowl on the table beside her. For a moment, she did not remember to be disguised. Then the weight of the hood, the ash paste on her skin, and the memory gem at her wrist returned. Caleb stood at the counter packing 2 cloth bundles, one with tools, one with bread. You should rest, he said without turning. The road will start pretending it is safe after sunrise. You are leaving? Checking the north fence. Then town. The official inspection is today. So I hear. He cut a slice of cornbread and wrapped it in wax cloth. Magistrate Barrack will want every farmer smiling in a straight line. Will you go? After chores. Erilyn studied him. You place animals and fences before imperial officials. Animals and fences usually need help earlier. The answer should have irritated her. Instead, it settled beside everything else she had seen. The stew, the socks, the calf, the roof, the food left where shame could collect it unseen. Small proofs. Too many now to dismiss as accident. She followed him outside. The farm at dawn was not beautiful in the way noble estates were beautiful. It was patched, tired, useful. The fields stretched red and dark under low mist, the damaged wheat heads holding beads of rain like tiny pieces of glass. Caleb walked the fence line with pliers in one hand, tightening sagging wire, checking posts for rot. Erilyn kept pace, cloak hem wet, lenses fogging at the edges. Your colony is not what Barrack shows, she said. Caleb glanced at her. Most places are not what officials show. Then why tolerate him? Tolerate is a generous word. He bent to secure a loose tie. People are busy surviving. That gives men with clean shoes a lot of room. The memory gem warmed, but she covered it with her sleeve. Not everything he said needed to become evidence before it became understanding. At the far corner of the fence, Caleb stopped near a small wooden marker half hidden by wet grass. Erilyn saw the names carved there: Emily Turner, Jacob Turner. No titles, no dates translated into grandeur. Just names, weathered but tended. Caleb removed a fallen branch from the marker and brushed mud from the base with his thumb. Your family, Erilyn said softly. Yes. And still you remain here. They are here. The answer was simple enough to make her lower her eyes. A duchess would have built a monument. A farmer kept mud off a name. When they reached the barn, the calf stood shakily under the heat lamp, legs thin but determined. Caleb smiled for the first time since Erilyn had met him. It changed his whole face and was gone almost as quickly. "Stubborn little thing," he murmured. Then a distant horn sounded from town, clear across the fields. The official procession had arrived. Erilyn felt the old structure of duty return, cold and familiar. By noon, she would stand unveiled before humans who had spent the night hiding their failures. By noon, her cracked bowl would become a judgment sharper than any treaty clause. Caleb looked toward town, then back at her. "You heading that way?" She touched the bowl beneath her cloak. "Yes." "Need a ride?" "No." "Then take the bread." He held out the small wrapped slice of cornbread. She stared at it. "Why?" Caleb's brow lifted slightly. "Because breakfast makes judgment less mean." Erilyn took it, and her hand trembled once before discipline caught it. He pretended not to see. Again, that mercy, she realized, was its own language. The horn sounded a second time. She walked toward town alone, wearing a beggar's cloak, wool socks too large for her feet, and a verdict that no longer knew how to stay clean. The town had never looked cleaner, and that was what made it feel dishonest. Erilyn entered Iowa Habitat through the East Road with the cracked bowl hidden beneath her cloak and Caleb's cornbread wrapped in cloth inside her pocket. The market stalls had been scrubbed. The puddles had been swept into drainage channels. Fresh banners hung from the courthouse balcony, bright blue and white, declaring partnership, prosperity, and welcome in 3 languages. The words looked expensive. The alley behind the grain exchange was blocked by supply crates, so no visitor would see the families waiting there for ration review. The roadside shrine had been decorated with flowers that had not been there when she stood in the rain. Erilyn stopped beside it for 1 second, looking at the new ribbon tied around the leaking roof. A clean wound was still a wound. In the square, Magistrate Beggar stood at a polished podium with his shoulders squared and his smile prepared. Farmers lined one side of the street in work clothes brushed clean enough to look uncomfortable. Caleb was not among them yet. Of course he was not. Fences and animals came before officials. That thought should not have made Erilyn feel steadier, but it did. The alien procession arrived at noon, gliding down the center road in silent silver vehicles that reflected the town back at itself without mercy. Varen attendants stepped out first, tall and precise in layered white armor cloth. Then came the empty ceremonial chair reserved for Duchess Erilyn Vera. The crowd murmured when no one sat in it. Barrick's smile faltered by less than an inch. Erilyn moved through the edge of the crowd in her beggar cloak, unseen by those who had practiced seeing only what improved them. One child near the front looked at her and started to raise a hand. His mother gently lowered it, eyes fixed forward. Not cruel. Careful. There it was again, the colony's favorite excuse. Careful enough to become cold. Barrick began his speech. Honored representatives of House Vera, Iowa Habitat welcomes this inspection with full transparency and pride. Erilyn almost laughed. The translator pin caught the impulse as a faint static hiss. Full transparency stood beside covered alleys and hungry neighbors. Pride stood where soup had not. A senior Varen attendant stepped to the podium and opened a formal channel. The Duchess will present her findings personally. Confusion moved through the crowd. Barrick turned toward the empty chair. We were told Her Grace would arrive with the delegation. She did, Erilyn said. Her voice was quiet, but the translator carried it across the square. Heads turned. The beggar cloak slipped from her shoulders. The ash paste dissolved in a shimmer of silver vapor. The biofilter lenses unfolded from her eyes like dark petals and vanished into her collar. Duchess Erilyn Vera stood in the rain-cleared square, silver blue skin bright, with its natural metallic sheen. Luminous eyes no longer dimmed. Her noble mantle rebuilding itself from nanofabric along her shoulders in flowing lines of pale crystal and blue light. The cracked bowl remained in her hands. The town went silent, so quickly the banners seemed loud. Barrick's face emptied. Your Grace, he whispered. Erilyn looked at him, then at the market, the blocked alley, the decorated shrine, the polished windows, the people who had stepped around her bowl. The inspection began yesterday, she said. Not at this podium. Not in your courthouse. Not in the route you washed for my arrival. Her gaze moved through the crowd and found Caleb at the far edge of the square, mud on his boots, fence pliers still hooked to his belt, breathing hard as if he had come straight from the fields. He saw her true face and stopped, not afraid, just understanding, slowly, that the woman at his table had carried the power to erase his world and had accepted his socks. Erilyn lifted the cracked bowl. "It began in the rain," she said, "and most of you walked past it." The cracked bowl changed the square more than the silver vehicles did. Erilyn held it at chest height, and every polished window, every clean banner, every prepared smile seemed to bend around that one damaged thing. The crowd did not move. Even the rainwater in the drainage channels sounded too loud. Magistrate Beggar stood beside the podium with his hands folded, his face arranged into respect because fear had not given him enough time to invent sincerity. "Your Grace," he said carefully, "had we known your identity, the entire settlement would have received you properly." Erilyn turned her luminous eyes toward him. That was the failure. The translator carried the sentence across the square with perfect calm. Beggar swallowed. Caleb remained at the back of the crowd, mud on his boots, old canvas jacket dark at the shoulders from field mist. He had not moved closer. He looked as if he would rather be repairing a fence in a thunderstorm than standing inside history. Erilyn almost envied him. She touched the memory gem at her wrist. A pale projection opened above the square, the market road in cold rain, the bowl falling, Boots stepping around it, Beggar ordering the streets cleared, the blocked alley behind the grain exchange. The crowd watched itself become evidence. No one was shouted at. No one needed to be. Then the image shifted to Caleb's kitchen. Stew steam rising from a chipped bowl, dry wool socks beside a stove, a calf under a heat lamp, a sack of flour left in a weather box, a leaking roof sealed in the dark while the owner slept. The square grew quieter with every small mercy. Erilyn let the images fade before they became spectacle. "I came prepared to sign a removal order," she said. A sound moved through the town, not panic, not yet, but the first cold breath of consequence. "Your colony reports prosperity while hiding hunger. It reports order while moving the vulnerable out of sight. It reports unity while allowing officials to mistake appearance for care." Beggar lowered his head. "The settlement has faced difficult conditions." "Yes," Erilyn said, "and difficult conditions reveal what laws are for." She turned toward the farmers, the shopkeepers, the families near the blocked alley. "I did not find humanity innocent. I did not find it noble by default. I found fear. I found pride. I found people who looked away because looking would cost them comfort." Her gaze found Caleb again. "And I found one farmer who gave away food he could not spare, repaired a roof no one would praise him for, and opened a door because a stranger was wet." Caleb looked down at his boots. That small motion did more to convince her than any speech from him could have. Erilyn faced the Varen attendants. "The removal order is withdrawn." Beggar exhaled too soon. "However," she continued, and the words settled over the square like a door closing softly but firmly, "permanent settlement rights will be revised under a new covenant." The attendants projected the document in blue light above the podium. Right of shelter for travelers and the displaced. Independent grain exchange audits. Emergency food stores outside magistrate control. Water credits protected from political retaliation. Witness rights for the poor, the indebted, and off-world residents. Relief coordination removed from the magistrate office pending review. Beggar's face went pale in a very human way. Erilyn did not enjoy it. That mattered to her. Justice that tasted too sweet could become another kind of vanity. "You are not being punished for failing to impress me," she said. "You are being corrected for forgetting whom a colony is supposed to hold." Mrs. Adley stepped from the crowd then, one hand on a cane, coat pulled tight against the damp air. She looked at Caleb, then at the projection of her repaired roof still fading above the square. "He never told anyone," she said. An older man near the grain exchange removed his hat. A woman from the blocked alley began crying silently, not because the law had changed yet, but because someone with power had named what had been done to them without making them apologize for needing help. Erilyn looked down at the cracked bowl in her hands. Yesterday, it had been a prop. Now it felt heavier than her signet. Caleb finally stepped forward, stopping several yards away. "Your Grace," he said, uncomfortable with the title. "I did not do any of that for a law." "I know," Erilyn answered. "That is why it changed one." 3 days later, the rain returned softly over Caleb Turner's farm, not as a punishment this time, but as a thing the fields could use. The red wheat lifted under it in thin, stubborn lines. The patched greenhouse lights glowed through the mist. In the barn, the calf stood on steady legs and complained at breakfast like a creature with plans. Caleb was repairing the west fence when the Varan shuttle landed beyond the service road without ceremony, its silver hull settling between rows of damaged wheat with the careful respect of someone stepping into another person's kitchen. Duchess Erilyn Vera came alone except for one attendant who remained by the ramp. She wore no disguise now. Her silver-blue skin held its natural metallic sheen beneath the gray sky, her luminous eyes clear, her noble mantle falling around her shoulders in quiet crystal folds. In one hand, she carried a bowl made of living crystal, shaped simply, without jewels or crest. Caleb looked at the shuttle, then at the fence wire in his hand. "Afternoon," he said. "Your Grace." "Caleb Turner. That sounds like I am in trouble." "You are not." "Good. I have already had a full week." She walked to the porch with him, careful not to crush the young wheat at the edge of the path. The kitchen smelled the same as before: stew, coffee, wood smoke, soil, and weather. The cracked bowl still sat on the table because Caleb had not known what else to do with it. Erilyn placed the living crystal bowl beside it. Old damage and new light. Mud memory and noble craft. For a while, neither of them spoke. The house did not need them to hurry. "The covenant has been accepted by the outer accord," Erilyn said. "Emergency stores will open before winter. Independent audits begin next week. Magistrate Barrack has been removed from Relief Authority pending review." Caleb poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs. "That will make him cheerful. It will make him supervised. Better word." She touched the rim of the cracked bowl. "I also brought seed rights for your damaged fields, debt relief for farms affected by frost sickness, and a repair grant for the North Road families." He set one mug in front of her. "That sounds like a lot of paperwork for one bowl of stew." It was not the stew. Caleb sat across from her, boots still damp, shirt sleeves rolled, soil under his nails. It was partly the stew. Erilyn looked at him, and for the first time there was humor in her without armor around it. Yes, it was partly the stew. Outside, rain tapped the porch roof. The sound carried them both back to the night she had stood in the square with a cracked bowl while humans measured whether her hunger was convenient. She looked toward the photograph on the wall, the woman with laughing eyes, the doorway half built. "May I ask you something?" "You may. Why did you not ask me for anything?" Caleb leaned back. "I did. You asked nothing. I asked if you had eaten." She lowered her eyes. The answer found her more deeply than any gratitude would have. "I came to judge humans by their power," she said. Caleb tore a piece of cornbread and placed half beside her bowl. "That was your first mistake. And the second?" "Thinking the best of us would be standing near the podium." Erilyn smiled then, small and real. Not because humanity had been cleared of failure. It had not. But because one farmer had made her unable to confuse failure with final truth. She lifted the living crystal bowl and pushed it toward him. "Keep this beside the cracked one, so your colony remembers what changed the verdict." Caleb looked at both bowls. "I would rather they remember who was hungry. Then keep both." He nodded slowly. After she left, he stood on the porch and watched the shuttle rise through the rain, silver against gray, until it disappeared above the wheat fields. Inside, the 2 bowls waited on the table, one broken by the road, one shaped by a duchess. Between them sat the quiet place where soup had once become evidence. She had hidden as someone the world could ignore. He became the reason she could not.